Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Upscale HR and ACE, the HR exam. This podcast is part of a series on the Workology Podcast focused on the roles and responsibilities of that Chief Human Resources Officer, or CHRO. The CHRO, sometimes called the SVP of HR or the Chief People Officer, is an executive or C-level role that deals with managing human resources as well as organizational development and implementing policies of change to improve the overall efficiency of the company. The CHRO podcast is powered by Daily Pay and Ginger.io. One of the reasons I wanted to do this series is because there is a lot of mystery around the CHRO role, and I wanted aspiring CHROs to know what type of skills and experiences they need to promote into a future role, right along with hearing from senior leadership about how they're partnering and collaborating with their executive peers. Today I'm joined with a longtime friend of mine, Judy. He's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Intelligent Medical Objects. Charlie joined IMO in November of 2019 as its first Chief People Officer. He now leads a collaborative effort to manage the culture and employee experience that attracts, connects, and advances the company's world-class workforce. Charlie has over 26 years of experience as an HR executive with some of the world's most prominent professional service firms, including Baker Tilly, Navigant, and Deloitte. In 2015, Charlie founded WorkExo, a cloud-based workplace culture management platform that was purchased by Question Pro in 2018. Charlie, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thanks, Jess. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Charlie and I go way back. We met on Twitter about 12 years ago.
That's right. That's one of those things that you didn't say 20 years ago, that I met somebody on Twitter.
No, yeah. It's but that's how you meet people these days. I feel like smart people, you meet them on the internet.
Yep.
I want to start with your background. You've held a number of HR leadership positions over the last 25, 26 years. How did you get into HR and how has your work evolved over time into your current role?
So I did not study to be an HR guy. It's weird. I obviously talk to a lot of people in this profession, and it's not unusual to hear somebody say, I never thought I'd be an HR person. I'm one of those people. In fact, I don't even really know when I was in school whether they had kind of formal HR programs. Certainly out of Cornell's industrial and labor relations program, there were probably few out there. I actually started my career as an accountant, as a public accountant, CPA with Deloitte, and Deloitte, like many firms, was just one of those larger companies that was willing to give people an opportunity to kind of pivot in their careers. And I had one of those opportunities almost by accident, almost by kind of maybe even by mistake. But I had a chance to go work with the firm's chief HR officer as his chief of staff, national product or project manager. And I didn't know a lick about HR, but, I could manage a project. So he took me under his wing for a few years, and I liked the subject matter enough that I stuck with it. And I started in the field like everybody, and was an HR business partner, and looked for experiences along the way that would, I think, prepare me for an executive role at some point, and kind of that's where I've been for the last 10 years or so. The profession has changed considerably in that time. Obviously, my work has changed considerably. I think we are, and I don't know that this is necessarily just my platform, my philosophy. I think a lot of people are experiencing this. I think we are much less programmatic than we used to be. I think we're a lot more focused on behaviors and cultivating the right experiences for the individual, not necessarily just for the workforce. I think we're relying a lot more on technology. I think we're relying a lot more on the analytics. I think we're more naturally integrated with the business. We're not fighting as hard to have a voice, which is something that, you I know remember talking a lot about, maybe even just 10 years ago. So yeah, things have changed a lot.
So looking back and thinking about what an HR person right now, what kind of skills and experience do you think are absolute requirements for someone to step into that CHRO role, whether they're just starting out or maybe they're thinking about their next step in the next 24, 36 months?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there were a cleaner recipe on that. I'm not sure that there is one. I guess I have a couple of general things to say, and then, a couple of specifics as well. I think an HR person that can have as many different kinds of experiences in the realm of work will be better prepared than any one HR person who may be single track. And by experiences, I mean not just, kind of the traditional HR competency framework, but business at large. So, and I think there's lots of ways to do that, but I think a stronger, a deeper, a wider appreciation for all of the various operating systems in a business is invaluable as part of your path towards leadership roles in the HR realm. I'm one of those people that kind of believes, admittedly biased, that everybody should start their business. If you're going to be in business, like, start your career with a degree in accounting, learn the brass tacks of business. I mean, that's where it all starts. Like, that's the skeleton of any enterprise, whether we're talking industry A, B, or C, and that deeper appreciation for how we account for a business leads to so many things. I can give you real life examples of how that experience has not only allowed or afforded me some credibility, that I think is harder to establish for some, but it also, like, allows me to understand what the hell people are talking about. So that's somewhat hyperbolic. I'm not suggesting you need to go out and get a real degree, but I think having that experience is really important. I also think that leads to what is increasingly important for our profession, and that's, the analytical side of things. I think just being able to understand data and leverage it and to rely on it really for better decision making. Having that kind of analytical mindset is, I think, really important. I think every HR executive needs to have done real time in the recruiting realm. I mean, I think you need to be a recruiter. It's such an important part of our business. I think it will always be an important part of our business. Right now, I think it's the most important part of it. It's certainly one of the most important parts of our business. And I think having that firsthand experience of what it means to not just identify candidates and to attract them to the business, but to find those candidates that are really the right, I mean, I hate the word fit, but will complement and will ultimately thrive in this particular environment. That's an art. That's not something that you get by studying or watching. You really have to have had that experience. And so I would really strongly encourage anybody out there that's seriously considering a leadership path to make sure they get that experience. And then the final thing I'd say, I think, is all around communications, which is a nice, kind of catch-all phrase. It means a lot of different things, but I think now it's more about, how good are you at telling a story? How good are you at understanding, the intricacies of an employee value proposition, as an example? How good are you at influencing others in a room? How good are you at being a champion for and, kind of mouthpiece for the really important things, the things that are central to your culture, to your people, to the career experience that they're having? All of those things, I think the better you are at expressing, articulating, and telling that story, the more effective you'll be as an HR leader. That was a long answer, sorry.
Oh, don't apologize. I find your background fascinating with the accounting because it's something that I wished I personally would have spent more time in, because it's so much a part of being able to talk that language and understand the point of view from the rest of your leadership team.
No question.
So You stepped into this company. You're the first chief HR officer at the company. I wanted to ask you, in your experience, how does that CHRO role change how company leadership works with HR or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of levers there, and I think it's really important for anyone, considering bringing their badass selves to another organization to make sure they're assessing those levers and kind of how they all come together. I mean, we all talked ad nauseum and, to now what is a cliche around this kind of seat at the table. And that's a really very easy thing to pay lip service to. I don't think there's a CEO on the planet that wouldn't, say out loud that HR is important to their business. But what does that really mean to them? So Intelligent Medical Objects, IMO, is a software company in the healthcare space. We're high growth. We're about 300 employees and very much in kind of build mode. And I mean, I'll just tell you that when I took this role, first of all, I was kind of in my own kind of career transition after doing the entrepreneurial thing for a while, and I wasn't really sure whether or not I actually wanted to go back and be an HR leader. It's certainly not in a traditional, kind of corporate space. And as I was talking with the CEO about this particular role, she said to me point blank, she said, listen, I've had a conversation with our private equity firm about hiring a chief HR officer. And they said to me that they weren't really sure we were ready for that yet, that we didn't have the critical mass, that we, that at this point, that kind of investment was warranted. And she said, I turned to them and I said, listen, I'm not sure you heard me right. I'm going to hire a chief HR officer. That is as an important part of what we're trying to do here as anything else. And so I just want you to know that. I'm not asking. And I mean, those are my words, not hers, but it is that kind of level of commitment that I think is crucial to having the space to do what we are good at doing. And I think paying attention to those signals is really important before going anywhere.
Can you talk to us about your high growth company during a pandemic, building out your HR team and supporting the organization? What was that like for you in the company and the HR team?
I mean, certainly it has been disruptive, eye-opening, challenging, frustrating, but also exhilarating, exciting. We'll all acknowledge how terrible this pandemic has been in so many ways to so many people, at the individual level, at the collective level, and for our global community, obviously. But I think, it's. I don't want to be flippant about this, but it kind of almost already feels like a flash in the pan to us. And I don't know if it's because we are high growth. I don't know if it's because we are, a software company. I think we already had a good dose of kind of agility and, tolerance of ambiguity and change and those kinds of things in our systems. We adapted very quickly to the environment. And if we, segment just the remote working part of that environment, we were already familiar with the tools and the technologies. We already had a remote, highly, or at least a good proportion of our people that were remote. I mean, we have brick and mortar and beautiful office space here in the Chicagoland area. We have two offices. And I'd say that at any given time, we were, before the pandemic, we were operating at, probably 60% capacity. So, and that wasn't by program, that wasn't by design, it wasn't by policy. That's just the way that we worked. We kind of worked where we needed to work to get it done. I do think obviously it forced us to confront some things that we knew were coming. I mean, we knew that kind of hybrid environment or that flexible environment, that remote environment was going to become increasingly important. We knew that we needed to practice developing software, remotely. We develop our software, kind of on a team basis. much more hands-on. I mean, even, physically in the same room together, and we had to change our way of thinking there. So, I mean, we had to think about it, but we worked at it hard, and we had some really, good response plans in place. But I think having the workforce that was already primed to kind of think on its toes made things very, very easy. It was interesting. I was in the office yesterday, and somebody was walking by for a tour of the office, and it was the first time that they had seen the office in a year. They joined us in May of 2020. So, it's that kind of stuff, which is really weird that we, part of our workforce has never had, that communal experience. And so getting back to that, I think is going to be really important. I think we're going to have to be very intentional about that. It's not going to happen naturally. We're going to have to give people a reasons to get back together again.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Upskill HR and ACE, the HR exam. We're talking about the role of the CHRO in private equity with Judy. The CHRO podcast series on Workology is powered by Daily Pay and Ginger.io.
Every employee has different mental health needs, from preventive behavioral health coaching to therapy and psychiatry. Ginger offers effective, convenient mental health care for any level of need, all from a smartphone. Learn more, visit ginger.com.
I want to go back to kind of, again, your background in accounting. I feel like it's such an important, the business acumen side of what we do in HR, and have you speak to analytics and HR metrics as they apply to people management. So, or maybe measuring employee engagement, for example.
Yeah, I mean, measure something, first of all. I mean, I really don't care what it is. Just start measuring stuff. Start paying attention. You need signals, you need signs, you need context. And those signals, those signs, that context is not in and of itself the answer to your questions, the solution to your problems, but it's a piece thereof, and it helps you think. It helps you solve. It helps you be informed, stay informed, and it helps you stay out in front of things. If you think about every aspect of your business, any operating system in your business, from finance to marketing to sales, each of those functions have relied heavily on data for decades and decades. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing the same thing in HR. In fact, there are lots of reasons why we should be doing it more so. So that's the first thing. We look at analytics here, people analytics is kind of being in two core buckets. One is, workforce analytics, and that's the kind of the stuff about your existing people, how they're employed, their demographics, the levels, workforce architecture, performance, compensation. It's kind of the more name, rank, serial number stuff, but it's important understanding this, kind of how is your workforce comprised. And there's obviously lots that you do with that stuff, from measuring turnover to cost of hire to, even just demographic makeup, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, et cetera. Just keeping an eye on that stuff is really important. And then we talk about everything else as kind of being employee experience. Employee engagement is a great measure, but it's an outcome. It's an outcome of all of the things that your people experience: the words, the actions, the values, the behaviors, the beliefs, the things that they encounter from the moment that they first meet your organization to the moment that they're looking at it in the rearview mirror. All of that culminates into some outcome. Some people call it employee engagement. Some people talk about employee net promoter score. That's the one that we use, by the way. Affiliation, connection, belonging, all of that stuff is important, but that's the outcome. And knowing what the level of engagement is, for example, that's interesting, but knowing what's behind it, knowing what's driving it, knowing which levers, which factors, i.e. behaviors, actions, values, beliefs, etc., in your workforce drive or change or influence that outcome. That's where the real value is getting down to that kind of behavioral level. And understanding what's important to your business, to your culture, to your employee experience is an extremely introspective exercise. It's got to be based on your company, your vertical, your workforce, your aspirations, your business objectives, your strategy, your et cetera. All of those things are very unique to you. One of the biggest problems that the world of work, maybe not problems, but one of the biggest lessons that we've learned about how we've measured things like employee engagements over the last couple of years is that, what makes an employee engaged at one organization is not necessarily the same as what makes an employee engaged at another organization. And I mean, there are some shared things, right? But getting down to what matters to you, that's the important piece. And if you can get there, then you can measure it. How much are they or how little are they experiencing those things that we know are going to drive success in our business? That's what we really try to do when we talk about employee experience metrics and analytics.
And I know you're passionate about this, so much so that you founded and started and ultimately sold your own HR and workplace engagement analytics company.
Yeah. And that was kind of the foundation of it was, let's stop worrying about good or bad. Let's stop worrying about whether or not you've got a high score or a low score. And let's stop worrying about whether or not the industry benchmark for employee engagement is 75 and yours is 65. Let's just talk about moving the needle and understanding what it's going to take to get there. And that all starts with just some awareness, paying attention to those signals, but making sure that the signals that you're measuring are your signals. And that was the foundation for the model that we built with WorkXO and then ultimately sold. And yeah, and we try to do the same thing here at IMO for sure.
Well, you mentioned IMO is a high growth software company and they are private equity or PE owned. And I wanted to have you talk a little bit about what PE owned means for those maybe who don't know.
So there are different ways, there are lots of ways to fund a business and to fund a business's growth and evolution. However you define that, from bootstrap, like we're gonna fund it ourselves. I bootstrapped WorkXO. I didn't have an investor. I didn't borrow money. I did it kind of from the ground up. You can raise money through venture capital and angel investors and other private investors. And then kind of, a layer on top of that is private equity. And then there's you can go public, right? And many organizations, certainly in this day and age of startup to entrepreneur to multi-billion-dollar, multinational organizations, it's a continuum. And they go through all of those phases. The PE phase is, private equity firms are usually a conglomerate of, really talented investors. They have a fund of cash to invest in whatever they think is kind of part of their own mission. Many private equity firms are lined up maybe by vertical, particular industry, by product. There are some that are now aligned by social cause, et cetera. But it is a commitment to investing in certain kinds of organizations. Our private equity firm is one that has great success track record in the healthcare space. And then they also invest based on maybe where a company is in their own evolution. So some are early stage investors. They would rather get in at the front end. There are mid stage investors, and then there are late stage investors. And to be owned by that private equity firm means that basically the stock, certainly the majority thereof, of your capital structure is owned by that private equity firm. Some are more involved in the management of your business, the day in, day out. Some are more hands off. They're typically very much focused on getting the right leadership team pulled together. They're very much focused on, kind of understanding and helping to establish the growth objectives, as is the case, obviously, with us, monitoring those objectives or our progress towards them, holding us accountable to them. They have their own resources to bear. So if we're struggling with a particular issue, they may bring in some experts to help us figure that out. It's like having a much more active investor in your business, somebody that has a real vested interest in seeing you achieve those targets. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I just, I was talking to somebody actually yesterday, and he works for a Fortune 200 company, and he's in a senior level recruiting role, and was thinking about moving over to another organization, and it's a startup, and he's like, well, I don't know what their path is. Maybe it's IPO. And I was like, well, there's a lot of other options other than just going public, and we talked about private equity as one of those.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that private capital right now is just really, really hot. And I think it's important for any of your listeners who are considering a path with an organization, any organization, to understand what that ownership structure is like and what the implications are. Because I mean, working for a public company is on a completely different end of the spectrum than working for a private equity owned company, than working for a privately held, closely held company. I mean, understanding those things is really important, and understanding what it means to you in your own role. And by the way, if you're going to work for a private equity owned company, I would suggest you take as much time to understand that private equity firm as you do to understand the company. How does this firm operate? What's their own philosophy? What's their investment strategy? What are they trying to, are they a 6-year hold, or are they a 3-year hold? And where are they in that process? Where's the company in that cycle? Are they 3 years in, or are they 6 years in? Understanding those things have probably as much an impact on your own experience as an HR leader as what do the offices look like, and what does your team look like, and who are you reporting to? I mean, that's all really important stuff.
Well, thank you for sharing, because again, it's not something that I think we talk enough about, like these kinds of business conversations, not just HR and employee engagement and metrics, but things like, who are your investors, and how are they going to support you, and what are their plans or strategies for your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. I mean, one of the things that I've been thrilled about, and I knew a little bit of this before getting into it, but there hasn't been a board meeting that's gone by since I've been here, and I've been here for 16 months now, that hasn't had some kind of HR, certainly people, piece of the agenda. And I don't know that that's usual. I mean, it's just nice to know that our PE firm is as interested in understanding kind of how we're investing in our people and the growth of our business as they are, other kind of more traditional things. And that's, I think, maybe more rare in the private equity space.
I think you're right, but I mean, I am glad that more leaders, executives, board members are interested and want to learn more about what in HR we're doing and how we're supporting the business.
No question.
You talked a little bit about your plans for opening back up, and I wanted to talk more about that for just a minute. The approach that you're taking in terms of opening back up, whether it's on site, remote, fully, or a hybrid model. What direction are you guys leaning?
Yeah, so we use the term hybrid. For us, hybrid means you're no longer a remote employee or an office employee. Everybody is both. To me, the most advantageous thing about this is that we are explicitly, like, this is all about finally recognizing that, listen, we hire smart, talented, trustworthy people. They're adults. They can make good decisions. And where they work isn't something that any one of us should have to worry a whole lot about. And that, my whole comment around finally is not just as, it doesn't necessarily relate to IMO, but I think the world of work in general really struggles with that notion. And if you start to kind of dissect it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I mean, we trust you with our clients, we trust you with our product, but we don't trust you to figure out where you need to be on any particular day. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I mean, take all that with a grain of salt. It depends on your industry and workforce structure and lots of other things, right? But the thing that I think is really important for us, and I alluded to this a little bit before, is that it just means you got to be a little bit more intentional about taking advantage of the right time to be together and not. Like, we still value, in fact, we I think really cherish what comes of our time together in the same room. We are a collaborative organization, we're an innovative organization, we're a creative organization, and a lot of that stuff comes from the physical interaction. Not to mention that we believe that, human beings need and get some sort of kind of lifeblood from being around other human beings. So this is less about like where you plug in every day and more about let's use our time together really wisely. Let's make sure that we're creating moments and opportunities for us to get together, but then to really extract the value from that togetherness. And that requires work on our manager's part, our leader's part. We're really trying to be a lot more intentional about that.
I love that. So today is podcast recording day, and I've done 3 podcast interviews today, and 3 of the 3 have used the word intentional.
Yeah.
And on completely different topics, but I feel like it's really important right now because we don't know what tomorrow is going to be.
Yep. And
we have had so much disruption in the last 18 months that we do need to be really focused and intentional.
Yeah. And I've said this a couple of times, in various forums over the last several weeks, and people keep saying, what are you doing in the new normal? And, my answer is that this is not the new normal. The only new normal is that there is no normal anymore. Like, we need to stop like preparing or figuring how to deal with the next, whatever disruption is in front of us today, and equipping ourselves to deal with whatever disruption comes our way. Because there are going to be so many of them certainly in our own careers, but in our lifetime, et cetera. And I think the more we teach our people to adapt to whatever comes your way, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, I think it's equipping yourself and your team with whatever comes next, knowing that everything is going to change again, and just thinking about the future state. What do we think might happen, and how can we get ourselves skilled up, trained, resources, whatever it is, to be prepared for whatever the future has in store.
Yeah, and that's where that whole intentionality thing comes into play, right? Like, you just have to be intentional about it.
So I want to close with, I feel like one of the hardest questions I think that we've ever asked on the podcast, because, and it's also different for everybody else, but what is the best leadership advice that you feel like you've received in your own career?
I mean, there are a couple things. So one is, and I honestly, I don't remember where I learned this from it, but it's not my, it's certainly not my concept. It's out there in a lot of places, and I'm sure it's there today, but this whole idea of having kind of your personal board of directors. I mean, I think, making sure that you have people to offer that advice and counsel, and that some of the people on your personal board of directors may not be, directly invested in, whatever your current job is, per se, but just have an interesting perspective on the world and life and maybe your profession, career, et cetera. But and have a diverse board of directors. Have people that'll tell you you're wrong and have people that'll tell you that you're right. But have more than just one person that you're looking for that kind of counsel from. I've been really fortunate to have, a number of those people throughout the years that I kind of go to again and again. There's some little things, that wouldn't necessarily, make headlines here, but like one thing that I've learned, and it's probably saved me 1,000 times, is put the keyboard down, pick up the phone. You're not even going to really effectively communicate anymore if it's something of significance, of substance, via email or Slack or Teams. I mean, it's nice. It's awesome to have those tools. But in our business, in the HR profession, it's still about meaningful conversations. It's still about a human interaction. It's still about connecting with somebody. And I think that involves old-fashioned, good old conversation. So pick up the phone, man, put the keyboard down. I mean, one of the things that I think I've learned a lot or I've certainly become a lot better at in the last several years, and I think some of this has come from my experience as a technology entrepreneur, is like, get comfortable making mistakes. I mean, the faster we make mistakes, the faster we learn from them, the better a product is going to be, whether you define that product as some HR program that you're putting together or a response to a particular issue that you're trying to solve. Make a mistake. I mean, there are some things that we do in HR that you obviously want to be really careful about making mistakes around, but there aren't many of them. So make a mistake, fail fast, learn from it, move on. I'm all about iteration, incremental improvements, getting stuff delivered quickly, even if it's not perfect. I've seen a lot of people in this profession over the years be kind of hyper focused on making sure that we've got a bow on top of everything. And that's just not how we develop anymore in the world. And so I think we have to get more comfortable with that as well. I think that's good leadership advice that I've learned from others that aren't necessarily in the HR space, but I think that's highly transferable. And then the last thing I'd say, because I know you didn't ask me for 3 or 4 things, you asked me for one, is it goes back to maybe one of the first things I said in this podcast, and that's fill up your dance card. I think dance card is really an outdated reference now. It wasn't even relevant for my generation, but my mother's generation. The idea is you go to these dances, and the objective was to dance with as many people as you could, to get as many people to sign your dance card as you could, get different experiences, meet more people. I mean, for me, dance card is get as many of those experiences as you possibly can on that card. Do as many things as you can. If somebody taps you on the shoulder with something that is way outside of your comfort zone, take it, go do it, check it out. If something makes you nervous, then it's probably something you ought to be doing, because it's gonna stretch you in ways that you would not otherwise be stretched. And I want my dance card to be filled when I'm finally hanging up my hat. And I think having that full dance card helps you really prepare yourself for any kind of move in your career. So that's the last thing that I would impart.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Charlie, Judy. I love just listening to your points of view and your experience. And I know the audience has gotten so many valuable nuggets out of this conversation. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks again for inviting me. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
I'm going to link to Charlie Judy's LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with him and pontificate on dance cards and employee engagement metrics and everything that we've talked about today. So thank you again. And I appreciate you being a part of the conversation here.
Thank you.
Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Restart credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more. It's really interesting to delve into how a role like the CHRO, whose experience more closely connects them to the strategy and operations of the overall business, with the rest of the company leadership team around things like innovation, diversity and inclusion, and business partnerships. I have known Charlie for over 12 years. Yes, we met on Twitter over 12 years ago. I love hearing about his role and the work that he's doing, and you can hear the passion throughout the conversation. The CHRO, and Charlie is a testament to this, doesn't just lead HR within the company. This role is key to structuring the leadership for the company's executive team. And I appreciate Charlie taking time to share his experience and expertise with us today. I also want to thank you for joining the Workology Podcast. It's sponsored by Upskill HR and ACE, the HR exam. This podcast interview has been part of our CHRO series, which honestly is one of my favorites, a series of interviews we've ever done for the Workology Podcast in our over 300 episodes. This CHRO series is powered by Daily Pay and Ginger.io. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. That's why I'm here talking to you and you're listening, because we are here to change the workplace, push boundaries, and help support our organizations. My name is Jessica Miller Merrill. You can check out Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes.